Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And I'm so pleased to have Miki Kashtan here. Thanks, Miki, for joining me. We just had a crash, and we had to restart again. So thanks for hanging in there with me.
That's why it's called Google Hangouts.
We're just hanging out here, dealing with the obstacles. So anyway, I wanted to introduce you. You're an international teacher, creator of convergent facilitation process, and the author of Spinning Threads of Radical Aliveness, Transcending the Legacy of Separation in Our Individual Lives. And I've got a copy of the book here that I can show. And this is your most recent book, and you're telling me that you have a couple new ones out too since this one came out.
This one was the first that came out, and then there's another one that came out a little while later called The Little Book of Courageous Living, which is a very small book with little short things for people to think about in terms of how to live in different areas. And I have another one coming out in the next few months. It's already in production, called Reweaving Our Human Fabric, Working Together to Create a Nonviolent Future.
Okay, so you've been doing a lot of writing. I've noticed you've done a lot of writing in different magazines, Cocoon Magazine, Psychology Today, and on your blog. And you've written a fair amount about empathy, different articles on empathy, and that's why we're here, is to talk about your insights on empathy. And you've done a lot in that area as the co-founder of Bay NVC, which is Bay Nonviolent Communications, and that's the center for trainings, workshops, events, intensive retreats, and in the San Francisco Bay Area. And you had added something before about that too that I wasn't covering.
Okay, first of all, I travel in different places in the world, and I do, I offer trainings all over. I've been to all 5 continents. Second, we also do a lot of work with organizations, not only with individuals, both trainings and consulting and facilitation and different kinds. And I was talking earlier about a project that I'm in the midst of in Minnesota, where I work with a group of legislators and lawyers and advocacy groups and a bunch of interested professionals and citizens and judges on a project of finding a collaborative solution to pretty acrimonious debates about child custody laws. And I can say that based on this work, proof of concept is already in place that collaborative lawmaking is possible, and empathy is a key element of it, because empathy is part of what helps people realize that they are heard, that what matters to them is included, and therefore they end up having more room to listen and include and consider what matters to other people, where previously they were just going back and forth, but.
Oh, great! So we really want to dig into that topic even more. So that's a good start. I also, before we start, wanted to mention your website, thefearlessheart.org, and I'm going to try to show it again. That's where things messed up a little bit before. And here's the website, and it's as I said, thefearlessheart.org. And you have a copy of your, as it's showing the new book that's coming out. Is that the new one that's coming out, or?
No, that's the second one that already came out. The new one is, we're just finalizing the cover, so I think it might be announced in the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure.
And then baynvc.org, which is the organization that you co-founded, and there's a memorial, or the honoring Involve's life. That's your sister, co-founder.
Yeah. And
she just passed away, so I want to maybe talk about that a little bit later as well. So I'll take that off the screen. I thought we could start with your book, Spinning the Threads of Radical Aliveness. The version that I saw or read, it actually has 3 chapters talking about, we go they're specifically titled with empathy. It's Crisis, Empathy, and Community, Discovering Empathy and the Healing Power of Empathy. So it's a big part of your book.
Yeah, I think that empathy plays a key role in our ability to liberate ourselves from the conditioning and socialization of societies that are not designed to meet human needs. And since every single one of us was born expecting that the world will work, and then discovering a world that doesn't really work for most of us, we had to somehow come to terms with it and accept things that don't work for us and kind of like submerge our true desires and our true feelings to manage to cope within the world and to find freedom, to be able to stand up to all that got internalized within us and to stand up to what continues to exist around us that continues to push in the direction of separation, scarcity, and powerlessness. We need support. And that support often takes the form of empathy, of people, ourselves and others, who are really willing to listen. And in the context of that listening, we can find more courage. That's a big piece of it.
Uh-huh. So there's one part in your book I saw, it was Discovering Empathy. And you said, I was stunned by the effect. Over the course of the weekend, I tried out my newly found facility with empathy several more times and confirmed myself the power of empathy. So it sounded like there was a kind of an aha moment. Do you remember that story? I wonder if you could
I remember very distinctly the moment in which I grasped the power of what nonviolent communication can do, and empathy for me is only one part of it. It's much bigger than empathy. And that was when a woman who organized a workshop, she was being really upset and judgmental about people who were lacking compassion, which is a very funny thing if you think about it, that you are advocating for compassion and then you're judging people who are not being compassionate. It's actually a pattern that happens a lot. You know, you're fighting with people because they fight. You're judging people because they judge. You are shunning people because they shun you. And we don't see the absurdity of that. But in any event, I was listening to her, and she was kind of like tight and defensive and kind of like twisted up in knots. And I was really, really quite new. So I was listening to her, and at some point I said, you know what I'm getting? What I'm getting is that you are so deeply wanting compassion and so sad when you see people that for whatever reason are not presenting it to the world, that you lose your own compassion when you see that. And suddenly her shoulders came down, her energy softened, she started crying, her vulnerability came to the foreground, and the whole thing shifted. So I remember thinking, that was the moment when I decided to dedicate my life to this work, because I remember saying to myself, this stuff is powerful. It's powerful. It can create transformation.
You know, I've done a lot of these interviews with people and asked them about empathy and their experiences, and especially for trainers, there seems to be these pivotal moments where they had like an aha moment. It's like, suddenly it's like, oh, I'd never been heard so deeply in my life. It's like, I got to do more of this, and it sounds very similar to your situation.
It's the opposite. It wasn't about me being heard. Mm-hmm. I got the power of it not through experiencing what it's like to be heard. I got the power of it through experiencing what it's like to hear another.
Mm-hmm.
Much more, how to say this? It's a different experience, because the power of listening, you know, being in an empathic connection affects the two people differently. And I got it through seeing the effect on me of witnessing the effect on another person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a somewhat different path in,
Mm-hmm.
if what I'm saying makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's like some people, it's like they feel heard really deeply, and it's like, wow, this is really incredible. I want more of this. And for you, it was, oh, I'm hearing somebody, I'm empathizing with someone, and really seeing what the effect is of hearing them deeply. So you actually had mentioned that in terms of the effect of empathy on oneself and on others as well, as maybe the empathizer and empathizee, and how there's maybe a different
Yeah.
quality to that too.
I love to talk about that because a lot of people get into the mindset that empathy is almost like a commodity that you give to someone else. And if you give it to someone else, it almost implies that then you have less of it. And you have to have like the big store of energy in order to give empathy. And my own frame is somewhat different. My frame is that empathy is almost like a big beam of light that has a 360-degree angle, the top of the light, and you can turn it every which direction. So you can light up any part of the world with those kinds of things. You know what I'm talking about? That go.
Mm-hmm. Like the light, the what do they call it, the lighthouses that have for the ships that go around.
Yeah. And
Uh,
so for me, it's kind of like I turn on the light and then I can direct it anywhere. I can direct it inward. I can direct it
mm,
outward. I can direct it at the situation. I can direct it at the world. Either way, there's something nourishing about having it turned on. Wherever it is directed, I am different by virtue of turning on that light.
mm,
Um, so I'll give a few examples. Let's say a friend comes to me in distress. A lot of us get caught in this, like, oh my God, my friend is in distress. I got to do something about it. And it's a very helpless feeling. Um, and um, and I'm turning this because I think there's a little motion in the background and this will help. Then if your friend is in distress and you are in this like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It feels helpless. If you remember that just your presence and being able to listen already supports your friend, then your helplessness goes away. You feel better because you're able to be present and witness and you see the effects. It's very gratifying. So that's one example. Another example is let's say you are judging someone. Somebody did something to harm you, that harmed you. You're in a lot of pain and you have all these stories about who that person is or why they did it, and these stories are pretty evil. If you then can bring the empathic light to shine on the situation, what ends up happening is you have a different picture of who the other person is. You see that what they did for reasons that have to do with their needs, with what's important to them, with what their feelings are, what their circumstances are, however you frame it. It humanizes them. As soon as they're humanized, your suffering decreases.
so it's
Third,
a, oh, sorry. So
the
it's
third,
that kind of metaphor of the lighthouse, that you're shining the light on them, and then just that act of shining the light on them is like the I get kind of trying to expand on the metaphor to tie it in with what you're saying. That the light itself, just having that light, that light is kind of the healing quality in itself. Like you turn the light off and you're in the dark and you're kind of in pain, but just turning the light on itself is kind of like this healing quality. So you can turn the light on them, you can turn a light on yourself, and
yeah.
it's that light in the darkness that is the healing quality.
And that light is not some kind of a mysterious thing. It's a frame. For me, the empathy light is a frame for understanding yourself and other people differently, through the lens of human needs. For me, that's what makes it most effective. Then whatever somebody does to me affects me differently because I understand to some extent where that person came from. It's not like I like what they did, but the extra pain of seeing them as a monster goes away. And I want to give a third example of how empathic listening to another person affects me, which is, let's say that you're in a context where somebody talks a lot and says all kinds of words about something, and it's kind of like you're trying to follow, and it's like this, and then they pause or whatever, or you even come in and you say, I want to see if I got what you said, and you summarize it in just a few words, because usually it's very possible from the outside to summarize what somebody said in far fewer words that they used. And suddenly you have clarity. You understand what before was confusing and overwhelming. Suddenly you have it for yourself. Oh, now I know what this person was trying to tell me. So in all of these examples, and there are many, for me to enter empathic space and shine the light of empathy on another person has a positive, beneficial effect on me. So I'm saying this to counter the myth that I'm doing somebody a huge favor by being empathic with them.
Yeah.
If I do it as a favor to another person, it will be something that will take up a lot of energy. If I do it as an act of kind of like shifting my frame and being in a different way part of the human family, then it has an extraordinarily beneficial effect. I'm very curious to imagine that somebody would do the fMRI experiments of that.
Yeah, I have experience with that too, that it's kind of like the light. I'm shining the light on someone of empathy. I'm hearing them, and they're kind of going on and on and on. And it's kind of like the light starts getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer because I kind of start feeling overwhelmed. But then in that pause, it's like if I really hear what it is they are and I maybe just rephrase it, summarize it, it's almost like it starts shining again. And I feel like, oh, I'm much more connected to this person. And so I really do it for me.
Exactly.
Because it's like I feel more connected. In fact, I say that oh, can I rephrase it? Can I summarize it just to help me to connect more with you?
Exactly. Yeah. So in a way, empathy is one of the ways to come out of the either or frame, or the separated frame that I'm over here and you're over there and we're separate. Through empathic engagement, we come back more closely to seeing our participation in the human family, our oneness.
Well, in terms of NVC, I've been looking at empathy from a lot of different perspectives, and there's kind of the NVC perspective, which puts a focus on the needs. And for me, it seems that empathy is like a supra need, if you want to use that vocabulary, in that you can't kind of get to the other needs until you go through this empathic space. So if we kind of focus on creating the empathic space, addressing that empathic need, that it creates the space for addressing any other needs. So that's always been my focus, is how do we really create that empathic space. So I'm just wondering how that kind of lands for you.
I'm thinking about it. I want to see if I'm hearing you. I want to say it slightly differently and see if that still captures the essence of what you wanted to say, which is thinking of it as supra need is hard for me to relate to that concept, but I would say it's kind of like a primary. I'm hearing from you that it's like you see it as this huge primary pathway to open up the space to understanding any kind of needs that might exist in me or in someone else. Is that this is the primary pathway that you see. Did I get that right?
Yeah, it's a primary pathway, and almost like a prerequisite to address other needs. That until we have that empathic, I mean, the supra need, I was just trying to use the NVC vocabulary of
Yeah,
need. And there's this whole notion of hierarchy of, you know, needs is another concept I've heard.
It doesn't exist in NVC. That's why I'm struggling with it. NVC does not have a hierarchy of needs. All needs are born equal.
Oh, okay.
So, and you know, I'm sitting here thinking about it. I can equally say that if someone feels fundamentally unfree, they might not even be receptive to empathy. So I think, so I'm actually not feeling a sense of agreement with you.
Okay.
It's more, the way that I see it is like it's a puzzle, and you keep looking for which is the right piece to put somewhere that will allow you to go to the next piece. And I'm always nervous about thinking that there's only one way for anything. So sometimes the path, and maybe many times, I don't know, the path will be through empathic connection. Some other time the path can be through supporting someone in having a sense of freedom. Some other time it can be supporting somebody in increasing their trust. Sometimes through expressing what is going on for me, another person's trust increases and they can relax into figuring out what else is important to them. So I think there are various pathways, and I'm not prepared to say that one is the primary or the prerequisite. Only that it may be a very thick and solid one, and it's still, I still have a sense that it's one amongst many.
Okay.
How does that strike you?
So, what kind of, just to rephrase here to help me with my connection, is you're seeing different pathways, and one is sort of the empathic pathway, and another is someone was needing trust, or I think it was freedom was the other one, and trying to support them in their need for freedom or trust. It would be another pathway.
Or somebody can be so hungry that nothing else matters. I mean, it's like, I think that which need is the most important changes in moment to moment, and there are many times when I'm sensing and kind of like a lived truth in what you're saying. I can see many times that empathic connection will pave the way for everything else. I just am leery about saying that's a prerequisite.
Okay, so it's like you're leery. There's a leeriness of like one way, maybe, that there's this one way, and kind of like a leeriness around the one way quality of it. But you can kind of see how it kind of fits, but it seems like maybe needing to check into it a little bit more, or think about it more, or...
No, not that it kind of fits, that it is one of the ways.
Okay.
I really don't think of it as a prerequisite. I think of it as one of the ways to create that condition of people being able to really act from a place of choice and meaning and integrity and interdependence with other people.
Well, I guess for me, it's like to even see that person who is needing trust, I need to be able to empathize with what their need is for trust, or their need for freedom. And without the empathy to even connect, to even see that and be aware of it, it's like I can't even take the next steps to it, I guess is what I'm thinking.
That shifts it to where, what do I need to do to connect with them? And where I was thinking you were talking about before is, what do they need in order to connect with others? And what I was saying is that I've been in many situations where engaging in empathic dialogue was really unwelcome by another person. That what worked for them is something else.
Okay. Well, here's the point, I guess. I don't want to belabor this, but you know, we're kind of getting to some of my, I don't know if it's not issues, but questions about NVC and the model, so forth. Is it to even see that this person doesn't need like empathy. They don't need like this verbal empathy. You need kind of a sense of awareness where they are, to even be aware of that. Like,
So I need that in order to be able to engage effectively in dialogue with another person.
yeah.
Definitely, engaging in dialogue requires two things at once for me. One is the capacity to access my own truth, and the other is the capacity to do everything with care. Kind of like the truth and vulnerability and the care and empathy are
Mm-hmm.
for me the two building blocks of dialogue, not one without the other.
Mm-hmm.
And
So a
that's
sense of authenticity within yourself, and then a sense of care, I guess, for yourself and the other.
right. And so that's on the side of the person who is seeking dialogue. What I was talking about is the person that I'm seeking to be in dialogue with may or may not be affected by empathy. That's all that I was saying. So when you said that's the supra need, I didn't know who you were talking about. I thought you were talking about the person who is not feeling connected. But anyway,
Oh, I see. Uh-huh. That's a distinction.
yeah. So there are two people in every interaction, and and given what their purposes are in engaging with each other, different things will emerge as the most relevant action to take and the most relevant frame to hold and the most relevant intention to carry out. So I just see a lot of complexity, not like a unidimensional, we've got to do empathy and then everything else will sort itself out.
Yeah, it kind of comes into what do we mean by empathy? Then maybe we could kind of tap into that. Because it could be we have different understandings of empathy. I've been doing a dialogue with Paul Bloom, who's like against empathy, and
Yeah.
I start getting into it, and I explain what my understanding of empathy is, share a story, and he says, hey, I don't think that's empathy. So it turns out we're like talking about kind of like two
Yes.
different things.
I can tell you that maybe there are, I don't know offhand of two words that are more confused with each other than empathy and sympathy. And the confusion is so large that there's some people who use the word empathy to mean what some other people mean by sympathy and vice versa. So I don't think there is a fully shared definition of empathy. For me, I look at the etymology and I see that sympathy is about joining another person's pathos, which is feeling passion, intensity, or whatever. So it's feeling with, which I think is what Paul Bloom is talking about. For me, empathy is feeling into and still maintaining your sense of being a separate person. So you're not affected by it in the sense that he describes in his article, like if somebody is suffering, you're going to suffer. That's more the sympathy identification path than what I understand as empathy. For me, my understanding of empathy is a really unique experience of having inside me both me and the other person. It's almost like I can see the other person and what they're feeling and what they might be thinking and all of that. I may be wrong about it, but that's immaterial. It's almost like I have my intuitive, imaginative, mental, emotional theory. I'm putting it all in quotes because it's not like that, but it's almost like I have a theory of what this other person is thinking, feeling, what they need, what might make them tick, what actions they're likely to take in this or that situation, how things might affect them. All of that, I see it. I have a visceral, like, completely clear sense in my fingers and inside of me of what that would be. But I am not it, and I know that I'm not it. It's like it is inside of me, but I am not inside of it. So to me, that capacity to differentiate between these two and what word you use is almost immaterial. because I've read many books. I've read a lot about empathy when I was doing my dissertation in sociology, like 12, 14, 16 years ago. Can't remember exactly. And there were books that I was reading that, in my understanding, were about empathy, and the books had sympathy as their title. I don't remember a single reference right now, or articles, and vice versa. I would take something out, an article, copy it or whatever, thinking I'm going to get some information about empathy because it said empathy in the title, but it was all about sympathy. So to me, I tend to align with him that to the extent that I allow myself to be affected by what another person is experiencing without maintaining my own experience of myself and what I'm going through, it has risks of me losing my capacity to make useful choice about how to respond to things. I'm fully aligned with him. I just don't think that the problem is empathy. I think the problem that he's describing is people not being able to differentiate sufficiently between self and other. It's a kind of paradoxical thing. We need to be able to differentiate between self and other in order to come together. I have a metaphor. I'm going to show it with my fingers because it's on video. It's kind of like when we are kind of like entangled and enmeshed with other people, it's like this, and there's no movement possible. If we manage to separate and we then come together, then there's a lot of possibility of movement and flexibility. So each hand is separate. They're connected. Each hand can move. They can move in coordination. It's a beautiful dance, very different from this kind of thing where no movement is possible because we're totally enmeshed and entangled.
So, for example, Paul Bloom, with his description, he would be describing sympathy, and you would actually agree with him in terms of, if he was using the word sympathy, you would be in agreement with what?
Not fully, because I think he goes to a lot of extreme because he's trying to prove a point. So the gist of the idea that if I am allowing my emotions to be aligned with another person's emotions and lose my own sense of self in the process, then I have a hard time trusting my choices of how to respond to the situation.
So that sense of self-connection, I've been calling self-empathy, and I've heard that referred to as self-empathy, that self-connection, being aware, going, kind of feeling into one's own visceral experience. Do you use that word, self-empathy, for that?
I make a distinction between self-empathy and self-connection. For me, self-empathy is a process, and the outcome of it is self-connection. So it's not an end goal for me. It's one of the ways that I can reach self-connection, but again, not the only way.
Oh, okay.
I can reach self-connection through just an immediate intuitive clarity without engaging in any kind of process.
So there's a process that you're using, that, like the feelings, needs, perhaps, kind of NVC process, looking, and that process is what you would be calling empathy, maybe?
For myself, I don't use those words or that particular structure.
Okay.
When I am confused or overwhelmed or whatever, what I often would do is pause and just try to tune in and listen to what is it that is really important for me. What is my purpose? What is it that I really want in this moment? And that helps me completely calm down and have that sense of connection with myself and know what to do next. Not always, but with amazing frequency, and usually it takes no more than 10-15 seconds.
Well, I've been, in terms of kind of a framework or vocabulary for talking about empathy, I've been using self-empathy for that, feeling into oneself, into one's visceral experience, and
Sure.
and into this. constant ongoing flow of visceral experience that comes up in ourselves, and then that sense of the empathy with others that you were talking about, and then there's and I think that that part might be what the academics are calling affective or emotional empathy. Would that kind of resonate there within the literature in terms of that feeling into other
Yeah,
people?
I think that the cognitive thing, another term that's used that I like better than cognitive empathy, is perspective taking. Are you familiar with that term?
Yeah. Oh, that's so in academia they're calling that perspective taking, role taking, or cognitive empathy, and those words kind of get used kind of interchangeably.
Um, I think that because the word empathy in its root speaks about affective states, for me the idea of cognitive empathy is a bit of an oxymoron.
Mm-hmm.
Conceptually. Not that I don't understand what they're talking about, but in terms of frame and definitional framework, I find it a little confusing. I can do perspective taking without having to have compassion. So this goes, excuse me, this goes into the relationship between empathy and compassion, which again some people interchange them, and I think they're very different. I think compassion, for me, I don't know that this is a dictionary definition or anything, is a feeling state that is in me. And when I experience compassion, the feeling, the related feelings that I have is a kind of a soft tenderness, like a sense of my heart is opening, that I wish well for this other person. But I can have that without having any understanding for what they're going through. I can have compassion without empathic understanding. I can have empathic understanding without compassion, though it's weird. But perspective taking really helps to distinguish this, because perspective taking is just the cognitive, really the cognitive part of where I apply my mind and my vast experience of what it means to be human to having a coherent frame of what the world looks like from within the eyes of this other person. It's a very powerful exercise, and it's absolutely necessary for resolving conflicts, is to get both people to be able to do perspective taking of each other's positions. They don't necessarily have to love each other, but just the act of seeing what the world looks like from the other person's position changes something in oneself. And that change is necessary in order for a willingness to create a solution that works for both people.
Oh, sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
you go ahead.
Oh, it's in terms of perspective taking, I've been liking the word imaginative empathy in the sense that I imagine what it's like to be in the situation of the other. I take on the role, like, there's so many different exercises, like an actor imagines being in that person's role, and the person that comes to mind is Meryl Streep, for example. It's like she imagines being in the shoes of Margaret Thatcher, and then she feels into her. It's almost like what's coming up for her in that role. So she's not like, she's kind of being herself, I guess, or feeling into herself and being that person.
So yeah, so I think the way that I look at it, empathy is made up of mind, heart, body, and imagination. And different people access empathy through one or the other of those routes more initially, and then if you want to have full empathy, you need to apply all of them on purpose. So let's say that mind is the first thing that is your easy path. Then you would kind of analyze the person's experience and would say, well, if that's their experience, then it makes sense that they would do this or this or this. But it can still be fully removed. You bring your imagination to it, then you can kind of like start to have a visceral sense of what the experience is like for the person. Or let's say that you start with your body, that the first thing, the first signal of empathic connection for you is some visceral sense in your body. You would need to connect that with your mind to be able to find words to convey to yourself or to the other, but to yourself first. What is that sensation that you have in your body? What is it telling you? And then the heart part of it is to have some care, without caring for the other person, without some sense of compassion. And compassion doesn't have to be care for somebody's suffering. It can be cares for somebody's joy. It's not just about people having a hard time and being empathic. It's about being able to understand why somebody would be happy for something that happened. So bringing all of these together, then you can act as that person. Because you have to feel it in your body to be able to be that person. Otherwise, you're scripting. So it has to live inside your body somehow. But just in the body, without having some conceptual map, some heart opening to this person, and some imagination, it won't get you very far. So in my way of looking at it, they all